Three alien girls from the pack-led race found themselves unceremoniously dumped on Earth as punishment for their peaceful ideals. Little did they know, their exile would lead to an unexpected love affair with human males. The pack-led High Council, known across the galaxy for their aggressive expansion and contempt for other species, convened to pass judgment on Ector, Zyla, and Mira. These young females had committed the unforgivable crime of advocating for peace with other civilizations. The Council's verdict was swift and harsh: banishment to Earth, a backwater planet inhabited by humans, whom the pack-leds considered vastly inferior. Stripped of their advanced technology, the trio materialized in a remote area outside Seattle, Washington. Confusion and disorientation overwhelmed them as they struggled to adapt to Earth's unfamiliar environment. From their hidden vantage point, they began to observe human behavior, their preconceived notions about the lesser species already beginning to crack. Meanwhile, Greg Taylor, a 28-year-old former Marine turned park ranger, received an alert about strange activity in his jurisdiction. Unaware of the cosmic significance of this disturbance, he set out to investigate. As Greg approached the aliens' landing site, Ector, the eldest of the three pack-leds, found herself captivated by his appearance and demeanor. The human male differed greatly from pack-led males, sparking a curiosity she couldn't ignore. Despite her companion's initial reservations, Ector convinced them to initiate contact with Greg. As the park ranger neared, the aliens suddenly emerged from their hiding spot. Greg's hand instinctively moved to his sidearm, but he hesitated upon noticing their non-threatening stance. Ector attempted to communicate using rudimentary gestures, her fascination with human customs evident in her body language. Recognizing the potential implications of this encounter for humanity, Greg made a split-second decision. He gestured for the aliens to follow him, leading them to his cabin for shelter and to prevent public panic. During their journey, Ector's eyes remained fixed on Greg, studying his physiology and movements with increasing interest. Upon reaching the cabin, Greg immediately contacted his former commanding officer, now working for a secretive government agency. The agency, recognizing both the potential threat and opportunity presented by the aliens' arrival, quickly mobilized a response team. As night fell over the forest, Greg attempted to make his unexpected guests comfortable while maintaining a cautious distance. Ector, however, found it increasingly difficult to stay away. Her eyes traced Greg's muscular form, noting the differences between human and pack-led physiology. A newfound warmth spread through her body, signaling the beginning of her fascination with human mating practices. With the government team en route and Greg on high alert, the three pack-led girls prepared for their first night on Earth. As they settled into their temporary shelter, Ector, Zyla, and Mira began to reassess their preconceptions about humans. The planet that was meant to be their prison was quickly becoming a source of intrigue and potential pleasure. Little did the pack-led High Council know, their punishment would backfire spectacularly. These three alien girls, sent to Earth as outcasts, were about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything they thought they knew about humans and themselves. The stage was set for an interstellar romance that would redefine the relationship between pack leads and humans forever. As the first light of dawn filtered through the cabin windows, Greg's eyes fluttered open. He found himself face to face with Ector, her large, dark eyes fixed intently upon him. The pack-led girl hovered mere inches from his face, her alien features a mix of curiosity and fascination. Greg jerked back, startled by the proximity. "Whoa there," he said, his voice still groggy from sleep. "Personal space, remember?" Ector tilted her head, not fully comprehending his words but sensing his discomfort. She retreated a few steps, her gaze never leaving him. Greg sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He glanced around the cabin, spotting Zyla and Mira examining his belongings with childlike wonder. Zyla was cautiously poking at his electric kettle, while Mira held his smartphone, turning it over in her hands. "Okay, ladies," Greg said, standing up and stretching. "Let's try to keep everything intact, all right?" As he moved to reclaim his phone from Mira, a series of loud vehicles approached outside. Greg tensed, recognizing the sound of military-grade transports. He moved to the window, peering out to see a convoy of black SUVs and trucks pulling up. "Looks like the cavalry's here," he muttered. The doors of the lead vehicle swung open, and a familiar figure emerged. Colonel Marcus Steele, Greg's former commanding officer, cut an imposing figure in his crisp uniform. He was followed by a woman in a lab coat and a man in a dark suit. Greg turned to the Packlet girls. "Stay here," he said, gesturing with his hands. "I'll be right back." He stepped outside, squinting in the morning sun. Colonel Steele approached, his face a mask of professional detachment. "Taylor," he said, extending his hand, "quite a situation you found yourself in." Greg shook the offered hand. "Sir, it's good to see you. I hope you've brought some answers." The colonel nodded toward the cabin. "Let's debrief inside. Dr. Collins here is eager to meet our guests." As they entered, the Packlet girls huddled together, eyeing the newcomers warily. Dr. Collins stepped forward, a gentle smile on her face. She began making simple gestures and speaking in slow, clear words. "Hello," she said, pointing to herself. "I'm Emily, friend." Hector, emboldened by her night of observing Greg, stepped forward. She mimicked the gesture, pointing to herself. "Hector," she said, her pronunciation slightly off. Dr. Collins beamed, turning to Colonel Steele. "This is promising. They seem to have some capacity for language acquisition." While Dr. Collins continued her attempts at communication, Colonel Steele pulled Greg aside. "Report, Taylor. What have you observed?" Greg glanced at Hector, who was watching him even as she interacted with Dr. Collins. "Sir, they seem peaceful, curious about us. But there's something else." He hesitated, feeling a mix of embarrassment and confusion. "The one called Hector, she's been very interested in me, personally." Colonel Steele's eyebrows rose. "Interested how?" Before Greg could respond, Hector approached them. She pointed at Greg, then made a series of gestures that seemed to mimic human intimate behavior. Dr. Collins, observing from across the room, stifled a gasp. "Mate," Hector said, her alien features arranged in what might have been a hopeful expression. Greg's face flushed red. That's what I mean, sir." Colonel Steele's expression hardened. "This complicates things. We need to separate them, establish some boundaries." As the day progressed, the area around Greg's cabin transformed into a hive of activity. Agent Harper returned from his perimeter check, reporting to Colonel Steele in hushed tones. More personnel arrived, setting up equipment and erecting temporary structures. Greg found himself assisting Dr. Collins, acting as a bridge between the xenobiologist and the Packlet girls. Hector seemed to hang on his every word, her eyes following his movements with rapt attention. As the sun began to set, Colonel Steele approached Greg. "We've set up secure lodgings for our guests," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "It's time to move them." Greg nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and reluctance. He turned to the Packlet girls, explaining through gestures and simple words that they would be going to a new place to sleep. Hector's face fell as she realized she would be separated from Greg. As they were led to their new lodgings, she lingered behind. In a swift motion, she snatched one of Greg's shirts from a nearby chair, concealing it within her alien garments. Later that night, Greg sat alone in his cabin, his heart pounding from the day's events. Outside, he could hear the hum of generators and the occasional murmur of voices as the research team worked through the night. Unbeknownst to those on Earth, high above the planet's atmosphere, a sleek Packlet scout ship silently entered orbit. On its bridge, General Kraz, a grizzled veteran of countless conquests, studied the readings before him. "So," he growled, his voice filled with cold amusement, "our little exiles have found themselves an interesting new world. Perhaps this punishment will yield unexpected benefits for the Packlet Empire." As the scout ship's sensors probed the planet below, the stage was set for a collision of worlds that would change the course of human and Packlet history forever. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees surrounding the makeshift research facility, the compound buzzed with renewed energy. Dr. Emily Collins stood before a whiteboard covered in symbols, letters, and crude drawings. She tapped a marker against her chin, lost in thought. "Dr. Collins?" A voice startled her from her reverie. She turned to see Greg Taylor standing in the doorway, a steaming mug of coffee in each hand. "Oh, Greg, thank you," she said, accepting one of the mugs. I think I've made a breakthrough. Greg raised an eyebrow. With the communication system? Emily nodded enthusiastically. Yes, look here. She pointed to a series of symbols on the board. By combining basic English with these visual aids, we should be able to convey more complex ideas. As if on cue, Hector appeared behind Greg, her large eyes fixed on the whiteboard with unmistakable curiosity. Emily's face lit up. Perfect timing. Hector, would you like to try? The Packlet girl nodded, stepping into the room. Greg watched as Emily began pointing to various symbols and speaking slowly. To his amazement, Hector responded, her pronunciation improving with each exchange. Over the next few hours, the new communication system proved invaluable. Zyla and Mira joined the sessions, though their progress was notably slower than Hector's. The alien girl's eagerness to learn about human culture was evident in every question she asked, every new word she absorbed. As the day wore on, Colonel Steele approached Greg. Taylor, I need you to oversee their outdoor excursion. Keep it contained. Understood? Greg nodded, leading the three Packlet girls out into the forest surrounding the facility. Hector fell into step beside him, her eyes darting between his face and their surroundings. Greg, she said, her voice lilting with the unfamiliar name. Humans? Mate? Greg nearly tripped over a root. What? Hector's face scrunched in concentration. Humans have partners? Greg's cheeks flushed. He could hear snickers from the researchers following at a distance. Yes, humans have partners, he managed to say. Hector nodded, processing this information. You have partner? No, I don't, Greg replied, acutely aware of how personal the conversation had become. Hector's face brightened at this. I could be partner? Before Greg could formulate a response, Zyla called out, pointing to a squirrel scampering up a tree. The moment passed, but Greg could feel Hector's eyes on him for the remainder of the walk. Back at the facility, Zyla and Mira approached Colonel Steele with a request. Using the new communication system, they expressed interest in learning about human history and current events. Steele considered for a moment before nodding. Approved, but under strict supervision, he said, gesturing to a nearby researcher to set up a secure terminal. As days passed, the differences between the three Packlet girls became more pronounced. While Zyla and Mira pored over historical documents and news feeds, Hector's attention remained firmly fixed on Greg and human social interactions. One afternoon, Greg entered the common area to find Hector standing over a smoking pot, surrounded by bewildered researchers. Greg, she exclaimed, her face a mixture of pride and uncertainty. I make Earth food! The acrid smell of burnt something filled the air. Greg approached cautiously, peering into the pot. Whatever Hector had attempted to cook was now an unidentifiable black mass. That's very thoughtful, Hector, he said, trying to keep his expression neutral. But maybe we should leave the cooking to the professionals for now. Hector's face fell slightly, but she nodded in understanding. Later that evening, Dr. Collins cornered Colonel Steele outside his office. We need to talk about Hector and Greg, she said, her voice low. Steele's brow furrowed. What about them? She's developing an attachment. It could complicate things. Steele rubbed his temples. Agreed. We'll reassign Taylor to more administrative duties. Limit their contact. The next day, Greg found himself buried in paperwork. His interactions with the Packlet girls reduced to brief encounters in passing. He couldn't help but notice Hector's crestfallen expression each time he had to cut their conversation short. As Greg immersed himself in his new duties, Agent Harper burst into the command center, his face grim. Sir, we've got civilians approaching the perimeter. Hikers, they're asking questions. Colonel Steele's eyes hardened. Deploy the wildlife study cover story and get Taylor out there. He knows how to handle civilians. Greg jogged to the perimeter, where a group of hikers were engaged in a heated discussion with the security team. He plastered on his most disarming smile. Folks, I'm Greg Taylor, park ranger. What seems to be the problem here? One of the hikers, a middle-aged woman with a camera around her neck, stepped forward. We've been coming to these trails for years. Since when is this area restricted for a wildlife study? Greg launched into the prepared story, his ranger experience lending credibility to his words. After several tense minutes, the hikers reluctantly turned back, though their suspicious glances made it clear they weren't entirely convinced. As night fell, the research facility hummed with activity. Dr. Collins huddled over a computer, her eyes wide with excitement. "Colonel, we've accessed their neural implants." Steele leaned over her shoulder, watching as data streamed across the screen. "What are we looking at, Doctor?" "Pakled physiology, technology, culture. It's all here," she breathed. Unbeknownst to them, the decryption had triggered a hidden protocol within the implants. High above Earth, on the bridge of his scout ship, General Kraz smiled coldly as an alert flashed on his console. "So," he rumbled, "the humans have made their move. Time to accelerate our plans." Back on Earth, Greg tossed and turned in his bunk, sleep eluding him. With a sigh, he got up and decided to do a quick check of the facility. As he approached the alien lodgings, he saw a figure slipping out of the door. "Hector," he called softly. The pack-led girl froze, then turned to face him. In the dim light, Greg could see a mixture of surprise and something else. Hope in her alien features. "Greg," she said, taking a step toward him, "I find you." Before either of them could say another word, the night was pierced by the sharp wail of an alarm. Red lights began flashing throughout the compound as Colonel Steele's voice boomed over the PA system. "All personnel, battle stations. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." Greg and Hector stood frozen, staring at each other as chaos erupted around them. Whatever was happening, it was clear that the delicate balance between humans and pack-leds was about to be irrevocably altered. Shattered. In the chaos that followed, Greg instinctively grabbed Hector's arm, pulling her close as personnel rushed past them. "We need to get you back to your quarters," he said, his voice low and urgent. Hector's alien features twisted into what Greg interpreted as a mixture of disappointment and defiance. "No, stay with Greg," she insisted, her grip on his arm tightening. Before Greg could respond, Colonel Steele's voice crackled over his earpiece. "Taylor, report to command immediately." With a frustrated sigh, Greg gently but firmly disengaged from Hector. "I have to go. Please, return to your quarters. It's not safe out here." Hector watched him leave, her large eyes reflecting the flashing red lights. As Greg jogged towards the command center, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. The following days saw a dramatic change in the atmosphere at the research facility. Colonel Steele implemented a series of strict new protocols, effectively isolating the pack-led girls from most human contact. Greg found himself reassigned to administrative duties, his interactions with Hector limited to brief, supervised encounters. Dr. Collins immersed herself in the data from the neural implants, often working through the night. One evening, she burst into Colonel Steele's office, her eyes wide with excitement. "Colonel, you need to see this," she said, thrusting a tablet into his hands. "The implants contain detailed information about pack-led physiology, including their reproductive processes." Steele's brow furrowed as he scrolled through the data. "How does this help us, Doctor?" "It provides context for Hector's behavior," Collins explained. "Her fascination with human mating practices isn't just curiosity. It's tied to fundamental aspects of pack-led biology." As the humans delved deeper into pack-led secrets, tension grew among the alien visitors. Zyla and Mira huddled in their quarters, speaking in hushed tones. "Hector's actions endanger us all," Zyla hissed. "Her obsession with the human male could ruin any chance we have of returning home." Mira nodded solemnly. "We must confront her, make her understand the consequences of her actions." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden sharp pain in their heads. As the sensation faded, they found themselves processing new information, fragmented data about their true purpose on Earth. Meanwhile, Hector had grown increasingly frustrated with the new restrictions. Late one night, she sat cross-legged on her bed, studying the security panel near her door. Her fingers moved swiftly, applying the knowledge she had gleaned from observing the human researchers. With a soft beep, the panel's light turned green. Hector slipped out of her room, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She moved silently through the darkened facility, her large eyes adapted for low-light conditions. Greg, unable to sleep, had decided to take a walk around the facility's perimeter. The cool night air helped clear his head, providing temporary relief from the stress of recent events. As he rounded a corner, he collided with a familiar figure. "Hector?" he gasped, steadying himself. "What are you doing out here?" The Packlet girl's eyes widened in surprise, then softened. "Greg," she said, her voice a mix of relief and grit. "I find you." Greg glanced nervously at the security cameras lining the perimeter fence. "You can't be out here. How did you even get past the security systems?" Hector stepped closer, her alien features arranged in an expression Greg couldn't quite decipher. "I learn, from watching, want to understand human mating." Greg felt his face flush, acutely aware of their isolation in the darkness. "Hector, we can't do this. It's not appropriate." Before Hector could respond, a faint humming sound caught Greg's attention. He squinted into the night sky, trying to locate its source. Unbeknownst to them, a cloaked pack-led surveillance drone hovered nearby, recording their every word and movement. High above Earth's atmosphere, General Kraz watched the feed from the drone with cold amusement. "Fascinating," he murmured, his gravelly voice filling the bridge of his scout ship. "The female's attraction to the human male could prove useful." Back at the facility, Greg gently but firmly guided Hector towards the entrance. "We need to go back inside. I'm sorry, but I have to report this." Hector's face fell, but she didn't resist. As they approached the main building, alarms suddenly blared to life. Red lights flashed across the compound as security personnel poured out of the doors. Colonel Steele's voice boomed over the PA system. "Lockdown protocol initiated. All personnel report to designated security zones immediately." Greg and Hector froze, caught in the open as chaos erupted around them. Agent Harper appeared, his face a mask of suspicion as he took in the scene. "Taylor," he barked, "explain this, now!" As Greg struggled to formulate a response, Dr. Collins's voice crackled over the radio. "Colonel Steele, we have a situation. The neural implants, they're active, receiving some kind of transmission." Inside their quarters, Zyla and Mira clutched their heads in pain as more information flooded their implants. Fragments of their mission, hints of a greater Packlet strategy, all jumbled together in a confusing array. Colonel Steele surveyed the unfolding chaos, his expression resolute in a grim line. "Lock down the facility, no one in or out until we get to the bottom of this." As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, the research facility had become a pressure cooker of conflicting agendas and rising tensions. Greg found himself at the center of it all, torn between duty and the undeniable connection he felt with Hector. In orbit, General Kraz leaned back in his command chair, a predatory smile playing across his alien features. "Send the next data packet," he ordered. "Let's see how our little exiles handle this new complication." The stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape the future of human Packlet relations, with the fate of two worlds hanging in the balance. The chaos that engulfed the research facility in the wake of the security breach left Colonel Steele with little choice. As dawn broke, he made a decision that would alter the course of their operation. "We're moving," he announced to his senior staff, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Pack up everything. We leave tonight." The next 12 hours were a blur of activity. Scientists scrambled to secure delicate equipment, while security personnel prepared for the complex logistics of moving 3 extraterrestrial beings without alerting the public. As dusk fell, a convoy of unmarked vehicles pulled up to the facility. Greg watched from a window as Hector, Zyla, and Mira were escorted out, each flanked by armed guards. Hector's eyes scanned the windows, clearly searching for him. Their gazes met briefly before she was ushered into a waiting transport. Greg moved to follow, but a hand on his shoulder stopped him. "Not so fast, Taylor," Agent Harper said, his expression unreadable. "You're on a different transport. Colonel's orders." Frustration boiled in Greg's chest, but he knew better than to argue. He boarded his assigned vehicle, watching as the facility and Hector disappeared into the night. The journey was long and circuitous. designed to shake off any potential tails. When they finally emerged from their vehicles, Greg found himself staring at a nondescript hangar in the middle of the Nevada desert. The group was quickly ushered inside and onto a waiting military aircraft. As they flew through the night, Greg's mind raced. What had Hector been trying to tell him? Why was Colonel Steele so insistent on keeping them apart? The questions swirled in his mind, unanswered. Hours later, they touched down at their destination. Greg stepped off the plane into a vast underground cavern, marveling at the scale of the hidden facility. Everywhere he looked, personnel were busy setting up equipment and establishing security protocols. Dr. Collins approached him, her face drawn with fatigue but her eyes bright with excitement. "Greg, you won't believe the setup they have here," she said, leading him deeper into the facility. "The containment units for the girls are like nothing I've ever seen." They stopped in front of a row of 3 large transparent chambers. Each was furnished comfortably, but Greg couldn't help noticing the advanced security measures integrated into their design. Hector, Zyla, and Mira were being led to their respective units, their expressions a mixture of awe and apprehension. As Hector passed by, she locked eyes with Greg. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but Colonel Steele suddenly appeared between them. "That's enough, Taylor," he said firmly. "Report to your new station for briefing." Greg watched helplessly as Hector was guided into her unit, the door sealing behind her with a soft hiss. He turned to Colonel Steele, barely containing his frustration. "Sir, I really think—" "That's an order, Taylor," Steele cut him off. "We have work to do." As Greg reluctantly made his way to his new post, he was unaware of the events unfolding far above the Earth's surface. On his cloaked ship, General Kraz frowned at the sudden loss of signal from the exiled Pakled girls. "How is this possible?" he growled, turning to his subordinates. "Find them!" When it became clear that the girls were now beyond their reach, Kraz made a decisive move. "Prepare a team for planetary insertion," he ordered. "We'll find them ourselves." Back in the underground facility, days passed in a blur of activity. Greg found himself reassigned to data analysis, poring over endless streams of information gleaned from the Pakled neural implants. The work was tedious, but it gave him a unique insight into Pakled culture and technology. One evening, as he was about to log off his terminal, a file caught his eye. It was heavily encrypted, well above his clearance level. Glancing around to ensure he was alone, Greg began the arduous process of bypassing the security protocols. What he found inside made his blood run cold. Meanwhile, Dr. Collins was making her own startling discoveries. She burst into Colonel Steele's office, her face flushed with excitement. "Colonel, you need to see this," she said, thrusting a tablet into his hands. "The implants contain detailed information about Pakled reproductive processes. And, sir, they're compatible with humans." Steele's eyes widened as he scrolled through the data. "Are you certain?" Collins nodded emphatically. "It explains Hector's fascination with human mating practices. This isn't just curiosity, it's biological imperative." The implications of this revelation hung heavy in the air. Steele's lips pursed as he made a decision. "This information is now classified at the highest level," he said. "No one outside this room is to know about this. Understood?" As Collins nodded her agreement, neither of them noticed the small red light blinking on Steele's desk, the sign of an active surveillance device. In Seattle, a group of tourists disembarked from a bus, their eyes wide as they took in the city sights. Among them was Lieutenant Drack, his Pakled features hidden behind sophisticated holographic technology. "Spread out," he murmured to his team. "Find any trace of our missing sisters." As night fell over the Nevada desert, the underground facility hummed with activity. In her containment unit, Hector sat cross-legged on her bed, her eyes closed in concentration. Her fingers moved in intricate patterns, tapping out a complex sequence on her knee. In the adjacent units, Zyla and Mira exchanged worried glances. They had noticed the changes in Hector, the way her body seemed to be adapting to Earth's environment more rapidly than their own. They knew they had to act soon if they wanted to salvage their mission. Greg, unaware of the growing tensions, continued his clandestine investigation into the classified files. Each new piece of information he uncovered only raised more questions. painting a picture far more complex and dangerous than he had ever imagined. As he delved deeper into the files, a shadow fell across his screen. Greg looked up to find Agent Harper standing over him, his expression grim. "We need to talk, Taylor," Harper said, his voice low and menacing. "Now." "We need to talk, Taylor," Harper said, his voice low and menacing. Greg's heart raced as he quickly closed the classified files on his screen. "Agent Harper, I was just—" A piercing alarm cut through the air, drowning out Greg's attempt at an explanation. Red emergency lights bathed the room in an eerie glow as the facility's power grid suddenly failed, plunging them into near darkness. Harper cursed, reaching for his radio. "What's going on?" Before he could get an answer, the sound of distant gunfire echoed through the corridors. Greg's stomach dropped as he realized the implications of the security breach. "Follow me," Harper ordered, drawing his sidearm. "We need to get to the command center." As they navigated the darkened hallways, Greg's mind raced. Had his unauthorized access to the files triggered this chaos, or was something far worse unfolding? They rounded a corner and nearly collided with Dr. Collins, who was clutching a tablet to her chest, her face pale in the dim emergency lighting. "Greg! Agent Harper!" she exclaimed, relief evident in her voice. "Thank goodness, we have a situation." "What's happening, Doctor?" Harper demanded. Collins took a deep breath. "It's Ector. She escaped her containment unit during a classified briefing on Pakled human biological compatibility. She accessed our systems and transmitted sensitive data before we could stop her." Greg's eyes widened. "Is she still loose in the facility?" "We managed to subdue her, but—" Collins was cut off by another burst of gunfire, closer this time. Harper's radio crackled to life. "All personnel, this is Colonel Steele. We have multiple intruders in the facility. Assume they are armed and dangerous. Implement Protocol Omega immediately." The trio exchanged grim looks as they processed the gravity of the situation. "We need to secure the Pakled subjects," Harper said decisively. "Taylor, you're with me. Dr. Collins, get to the secure data center and initiate a full system lockdown." As they split up, Greg couldn't shake the feeling that Ector's actions and the current attack were somehow connected. They made their way through the chaotic facility, passing panicked researchers and grim-faced security personnel preparing for combat. When they reached the containment area, Greg's breath caught in his throat. Ector's unit was empty, the door hanging open. In the adjacent units, Zyla and Mira pressed against the transparent walls, their alien features contorted with fear and confusion. "Damn it," Harper muttered. He approached the control panel for Zyla and Mira's units. "We need to move them to a more secure location." As Harper worked on releasing the other two Pakleds, Greg heard a soft sound behind him. He turned to see Ector emerging from the shadows, her large eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "Greg," she said, her voice a mixture of relief and urgency. "Need help. Body changing." Before Greg could respond, Harper spun around, his weapon trained on Ector. "Don't move!" he barked. Ector raised her hand slowly, her gaze never leaving Greg's face. "Please," she pleaded. "Not enemy. Want to understand." The standoff was interrupted by a deafening explosion that shook the entire level. Smoke began to fill the corridor as the sounds of combat grew closer. Harper made a split-second decision. "Taylor, get her secure. I'll cover our retreat with the other two." As Greg cautiously approached Ector, alarms blared throughout the facility. Colonel Steele's voice came over the intercom, tense and commanding. "All personnel, we have a code black. Pakled forces have breached the inner perimeter. Prepare for immediate evacuation." Greg gently took Ector's arm, noticing how she trembled at his touch. "Come on," he said softly. "We need to get you somewhere safe." As they hurried through the smoke-filled corridors, following Harper, who was guiding Zyla and Mira, Greg's mind raced. The facility was under attack, likely by pack leads attempting to rescue their compatriots. Yet Ector had sought him out instead of trying to escape or join the intruders. They reached a sealed blast door, Harper quickly inputting a code to open it. As the heavy metal barrier slid aside, they found themselves face to face with a group of armed figures. Their pack-led features were barely concealed by sophisticated holographic technology, which flickered and distorted in the chaotic environment. "Halt!" the lead pack-led shouted, raising an alien weapon. "Release our sisters!" Time seemed to slow as Greg assessed their options. Harper's hand moved towards his sidearm, while Zyla and Mira looked uncertainly between their rescuers and their human captors. Hector's grip on Greg's arm tightened. He glanced down to see her face contorted in pain, her body trembling more violently. "Something wrong," she gasped, her knees buckling. As Greg caught her, supporting her weight, the lead pack-led's eyes widened in recognition. "Hector!" he exclaimed. "What have they done to you?" The tension in the corridor ratcheted up another notch, as both sides realized the complexity of the situation. The pack-led infiltrators were here to rescue their people, but Hector's condition threw an unexpected wrench into their plans. In the distance, the sounds of combat grew louder. Human security forces were closing in, trapping them between two fronts. Greg looked from Hector's pained face to the armed pack-leds, then to Harper's tense posture, knowing that the next few moments would determine not just their fate, but potentially the future of human pack-led relations. As alarms continued to blare and smoke filled the air, Greg realized he had to make a choice. The fate of two species might well rest on what happened in this corridor, with Hector's trembling form cradled in his arms. Greg's mind raced as he assessed the volatile situation. Hector trembled in his arms, her alien features contorted in pain. The armed pack-leads faced them, weapons raised, while Harper stood tensely behind them with Zyla and Mira. Before anyone could act, another explosion rocked the facility. The blast knocked them off balance, and in that moment of confusion, Greg made his decision. He scooped up Hector and darted through a gap in the pack-led formation. "Taylor, what are you doing?" Harper shouted, but his voice was lost in the cacophony of alarms and gunfire. Greg sprinted down the smoke-filled corridor, Hector clinging to him. He could hear the sounds of pursuit behind him, but he didn't dare look back. His military training kicked in as he navigated the labyrinthine facility, ducking into side passages and avoiding the main thoroughfares where combat raged between human security forces and pack-led infiltrators. "Greg!" Hector gasped, her large eyes locking onto his. "Why help?" He glanced down at her as he ran, noting the sheen of sweat on her alien skin and the way her body seemed to pulse with an internal heat. "I don't know," he admitted, "but something's wrong with you, and I'm going to find out what." They emerged into a large laboratory where Dr. Collins and her team were frantically downloading data onto portable drives. The scientist looked up in shock as Greg burst in with Hector. "Greg, what's going on?" Collins demanded, her eyes widening at the sight of Hector. "No time to explain," Greg panted. "Hector's changing. We need your help." Collins hesitated, glancing at her team and the vital research they were trying to salvage. Another explosion, closer this time, made the decision for her. "Secure that data and initiate the emergency transfer protocol," she ordered her team. Turning to Greg, she said, "Follow me." They hurried to a small medical bay adjacent to the lab. As Collins began scanning Hector with handheld devices, Greg kept watch at the door, his muscles tense and ready for action. "Fascinating," Collins muttered, studying the readouts. "Her biology is adapting at an unprecedented rate. It's as if her exposure to Earth's environment is triggering some kind of evolutionary response." Hector writhed on the examination table, her skin taking on a faint luminescence. "Hurts," she moaned. "Not supposed to happen." Before Collins could respond, the lab's communication system crackled to life. Colonel Steele's voice filled the room, tense and commanding. "All personnel, this is a code black. Pack-led forces have breached the inner perimeter. Prepare for immediate evacuation. Taylor, if you can hear this, bring the pack-led subject to Extraction Point Delta immediately." Greg's fists tight. He knew Extraction Point Delta well. It was a secure holding area, not an escape route. "We can't take her there," he said to Collins. "They'll just lock her up again." Collins looked torn, her eyes darting between Greg, Hector, and her research. "Greg, we can't just—" Her words were cut off by the sound of gunfire erupting just outside the lab. Through the reinforced windows, They could see flashes of light as human and Pakled forces exchange fire. "We need to move," Greg urged, helping Ector to her feet. "Is there another way out of here?" Collins nodded, her face set with purpose. "The maintenance tunnels, they lead to the surface, but they're a maze. Without a guide, you'll get lost." Greg met her gaze, understanding dawning. "You're coming with us?" "Someone needs to make sure this research doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Pakled or human," Collins said, patting the portable drive in her pocket. "And Ector needs medical attention. I'm your best shot." As they prepared to leave, the lab doors burst open. Zyla and Mira stumbled in, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Help!" Zyla gasped. "Humans, Pakleds, everyone fighting. Need safe place." Greg looked to Collins, who nodded reluctantly. "The more the merrier," she sighed. "But we need to go now." Leading the group to a hidden panel in the wall, Collins revealed the entrance to the maintenance tunnels. As they filed in, Greg brought up the rear, casting one last look at the chaos engulfing the facility. The tunnels were dark and cramped, lit only by emergency lighting that cast eerie shadows on the walls. They moved as quickly as they could, with Greg supporting Ector and Collins guiding them through the labyrinthine passages. "Where are we going?" Mira asked, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "To the surface," Greg replied. "After that, I'm not sure." As they navigated the tunnels, the sounds of combat grew more distant. But a new noise began to reach their ears, a deep, thrumming vibration that seemed to come from above. "What is that?" Zyla asked, her large eyes wide with apprehension. Before anyone could answer, the tunnel shook violently, sending them stumbling against the walls. Dust and small chunks of concrete rained down on them. "That wasn't from the facility," Collins said, her voice tight with fear. "Something's happening on the surface." They quickened their pace, driven by a growing sense of urgency. As they rounded a corner, they saw a ladder leading up to a heavy metal hatch. "This is it," Collins announced. "This leads to a service entrance about a mile from the main facility." Greg helped Ector up the ladder, then followed close behind. As he pushed open the hatch, the desert night air rushed in, carrying with it the acrid smell of smoke and something else, an alien scent he couldn't quite place. One by one, they emerged onto the surface. The scene that greeted them made them freeze in awe and terror. The night sky was ablaze with streaks of fire, dozens, perhaps hundreds of objects entering the atmosphere at high speed. "Pakled ships," Ector whispered, her voice a mixture of fear and wonder. As they watched, the nearest of these fiery objects slowed its descent, its true form becoming visible, a massive, otherworldly craft that dwarfed anything Greg had ever seen. In that moment, standing in the Nevada desert with 2 humans and 3 Pakleds, Greg realized that everything had changed. The conflict that had been confined to a secret underground facility had just escalated into something far greater, a potential war between worlds. The Pakled ship loomed ever closer, its shadow falling over them as they stood exposed and vulnerable on the desert floor. Greg knew they had to move, to find shelter, to do something. But for now, all he could do was stare up at the sky, watching as humanity's first contact with an alien civilization unfolded in a way no one could have predicted. The enormous Pakled ship cast a shadow over the desert, its size and proximity sending shockwaves of awe and terror through the small group. Greg snapped out of his stunned reverie first. "We need to move," he said urgently, grabbing Ector's arm. "Now!" As if on cue, the distant sound of explosions erupted from the direction of the facility. The conflict that had been contained underground was now spilling onto the surface, exacerbated by the arrival of the Pakled ships. "There!" Collins pointed to a cluster of vehicles about 100 yards away. "The emergency motor pool." They sprinted across the open ground, Greg supporting Ector as she struggled to keep up. Zyla and Mira, despite their recent captivity, showed surprising speed and agility. As they reached the vehicles, Greg's military training kicked in. He quickly assessed their options and chose a rugged all-terrain vehicle with armored plating. "Everyone in," he ordered, helping Ector into the passenger seat while the others clambered into the back. The engine roared to life, and Greg floored the accelerator. The vehicle lurched forward, kicking up a cloud of dust as they sped away from the facility. In the rearview mirror, Greg could see chaos unfolding. Human and pack-led forces poured out of the facility, engaging in firefights across the desert floor. Above, more pack-led ships descended, their massive forms blocking out the stars. "Where are we going?" Collins shouted over the engine's roar. Greg gripped the steering wheel tightly. "I know a place, an old research outpost, about 50 miles from here. It should have communication equipment we can use to contact friendly forces." As they drove through the night, the adrenaline of their escape began to wear off. An uneasy silence settled over the group, broken only by the rumble of the engine and the occasional gasp from Hector as she continued to experience waves of discomfort from her changing physiology. It was Hector who finally broke the silence. "Greg," she said, her voice strained but curious. "Human mating. How does it work?" Greg nearly swerved off the road in surprise. "What? Hector, is this really the time?" "Need to understand," Hector persisted. "Pack-led different. Humans fascinating." In the back, Zyla and Mira leaned forward, clearly interested in the answer as well. Collins suppressed a laugh, despite the gravity of their situation. Greg felt his face growing hot. "Well, it's complicated. Humans form relationships, emotional bonds. Then there's physical intimacy, which involves—" He trailed off, acutely aware of the 4 pairs of eyes fixed on him. "Look, maybe we should focus on our current situation. We're in the middle of an alien invasion after all." But Hector was undeterred. Emotional bonds, like friendship, or different? Greg sighed, realizing he wasn't going to get out of this conversation. Different, deeper. It's called love. It's hard to explain, but it's a powerful connection between 2 people. "And physical intimacy?" Zyla chimed in from the back. "It's painful?" "No," Greg said quickly. "Well, not usually. It's meant to be pleasurable. It's how humans reproduce, but it's also an expression of love and affection." As Greg continued to field increasingly specific questions about human relationships and reproduction, he couldn't help but notice Hector's intense focus on his answers. There was something in her gaze that went beyond mere curiosity. The conversation was mercifully interrupted by a flash of light in the distance. Greg slowed the vehicle, peering into the darkness. "What is it?" Collins asked, leaning forward. "Not sure," Greg replied, his voice tense. "But I don't think we're alone out here." As if in response to his words, a beam of light suddenly illuminated their vehicle. The sound of engines filled the air as several pack-led craft appeared on the horizon, rapidly closing in on their position. "Hold on!" Greg shouted, slamming his foot on the accelerator. The vehicle lurched forward, racing across the uneven desert terrain. The pack-led ships gave chase, their advanced technology allowing them to easily keep pace. Beams of energy sizzled past the vehicle, scorching the ground nearby. "They're trying to disable us, not destroy us," Collins observed. "They want us alive." Greg's mind raced as he swerved to avoid another energy blast. The research outpost was still miles away, and they were hopelessly outmatched in terms of speed and firepower. Suddenly, Hector grabbed his arm. "Greg," she said, her voice urgent, "I have idea. Pack-led ships can interface, control." "What do you mean?" Greg asked, struggling to keep the vehicle steady as he evaded another attack. "Pack-led technology, connected. If reach outpost, maybe find way to stop ships. Stop invasion." Greg glanced at Hector, seeing the purpose in her eyes. Despite the danger they were in, despite the bizarre conversation about human mating practices just moments ago, he felt a connection with her that he couldn't explain. "All right," he said, setting his jaw. "Let's get to that outpost." As they raced across the desert, pursued by pack-led ships, and with the fate of 2 species potentially hanging in the balance, Greg couldn't help but wonder how his life had taken such an extraordinary turn. But with Hector by his side and a glimmer of hope on the horizon, he knew that this was just the beginning of their incredible journey. As their vehicle sped across the desert, leaving trails of dust in its wake. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of orange and pink as Greg brought the all-terrain vehicle to a halt outside the abandoned research outpost. The dilapidated structure loomed before them, a stark silhouette against the brightening horizon. "We're here," Greg announced, his voice tight with tension. "Everyone out, quickly." As they exited the vehicle, the distant rumble of engines filled the air. Greg's eyes darted to the sky, spotting the approaching Pakled ships. "Inside! Now!" They rushed into the outpost, Greg securing the heavy metal door behind them. The interior was a maze of dusty corridors and abandoned laboratories. Debris littered the floor, evidence of the facility's hasty evacuation. "We need to find the control room," Collins said, her eyes scanning their surroundings. "That's where the communication equipment will be." As they moved deeper into the facility, a cacophony of sounds erupted outside, the unmistakable noise of battle. Through grimy windows, they caught glimpses of Lieutenant Drack's team engaging with human forces led by Agent Harper. "This is bad," Greg muttered, guiding the group toward the center of the outpost. "We're caught in the middle of a three-way standoff." They reached the control room, a circular chamber filled with outdated computer terminals and communication equipment. Greg immediately set to work, powering up the systems while Collins assisted. Hector's eyes widened as she surveyed the room. "Greg," she said urgently, pointing to a device tucked away in a corner. "That, important." Greg followed her gaze, spotting a sleek, unfamiliar piece of technology. It stood out amidst the outdated equipment, its design clearly more advanced. "What is it?" he asked, approaching cautiously. "Prototype," Hector explained, her voice filled with excitement. "Can interface with Pakled tech, maybe stop invasion." Greg's mind raced with possibilities. "All right, let's see what we can do with it. Zyla, Mira," he turned to the other Pakled girls. "I need you to secure our position, block the entrances, find anything we can use as weapons." As Zyla and Mira set off on their task, Greg and Hector focused on the prototype device. They worked in tandem, Hector's knowledge of Pakled technology complementing Greg's military experience. "Greg," Hector said softly as they worked, her large eyes fixed on him. "Still curious, human mating. You feel connection? With me?" Greg's hands froze over the device's controls, his heart rate spiking. "Hector, this isn't really the time." A loud explosion outside punctuated his words, the building shaking with the impact. Through the windows, they saw Pakled ships engaging with human fighter jets, streaks of energy crisscrossing the sky. "General Kraz," Hector whispered, fear evident in her voice. "He's here." Greg refocused on the task at hand, pushing his conflicted feelings aside. "We need to hurry. If we can interface this device with your neural implant, we might be able to disrupt their communications." As they worked, the sounds of battle intensified. Zyla and Mira returned, having fortified their position as best they could. "Humans and Pakleds fighting," Zyla reported. "Many ships in sky." Greg nodded grimly. "It's a full-scale invasion now. Earth's military will be mobilizing worldwide." Suddenly, the prototype device hummed to life, its surface glowing with an eerie blue light. Hector gasped, her eyes widening as information flooded her mind. "Connected," she said, her voice taking on an otherworldly quality. "Can see Pakled networks. Can send message." Greg's heart raced with hope. "Do it. Broadcast a message to all Pakled forces. Tell them to stand down." Hector closed her eyes, concentrating intensely. The air seemed to vibrate with unseen energy as she interfaced with the Pakled communication systems. Outside, the battle took an unexpected turn. Pakled ships began to waver in the air, their movements becoming erratic. Some Pakled ground forces stumbled, clutching their heads in apparent confusion. "It's working," Collins exclaimed, watching the scene unfold through the windows. The moment of triumph was short-lived. The facility's emergency channel crackled to life, Dr. Collins's voice filling the room. "Greg, can you hear me? You need to know the truth about the neural implants. They're influencing the girl's behavior, their physiology. The connection you feel with Hector, it might not be real." Greg's blood ran cold as he processed this information. He looked at Hector, still deep in concentration, and felt a pang of doubt. Was everything he'd experienced with her, the growing bond between them, just a byproduct of alien technology? Before he could dwell on this revelation, the building shook violently. The prototype device sparked, its glow intensifying. Ektor cried out in pain, collapsing to the floor. "Ektor!" Greg rushed to her side, cradling her head. "What's happening?" "Device malfunctioning," Ektor gasped, her body convulsing. "Hurts. All Pakled tech affected." Through the windows, they watched in horror as Pakled ships began to fall from the sky, creating fiery streaks across the dawn sky. The sight was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, visible for miles around. "We need to shut it down," Greg said, reaching for the device. But as his hand touched its surface, a powerful shock threw him back. The room erupted into chaos. Zyla and Mira writhed on the floor, clearly affected by the malfunctioning device. Colin struggled with the outpost systems, trying to find a way to contain the energy output. Amidst the pandemonium, the door to the control room burst open. Lieutenant Drack stood in the threshold, his weapon lowered, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. "What have you done?" Drack demanded, his gaze fixed on the glowing prototype. Greg struggled to his feet, positioning himself between Drack and the others. "It was an accident. The device, it's affecting all Pakled technology." Drack's expression shifted from anger to concern as he watched Ektor and the other girls suffering. "This has gone too far," he said, his voice heavy with realization. "The invasion, the conflict, it needs to end." "Can you help us?" Greg asked, hope mingling with desperation in his voice. "Can you contact General Kraz, negotiate a ceasefire?" Drack hesitated, his internal struggle visible on his face. Finally, he nodded. "I'll try, but first we need to stop that device." As Drack moved to assist, Greg found himself facing an impossible choice. The malfunctioning prototype could potentially end the Pakled threat, once and for all, but at what cost? The pain it was causing Ektor and her companions was evident, and the wider effects on Pakled technology were catastrophic. Greg looked at Ektor, her face contorted in agony, then at the device that held the power to change the course of the invasion. The fate of two species hung in the balance, and the next decision he made would shape the future of human-Pakled relations forever. With trembling hands, Greg reached for the prototype, knowing that whatever he chose, nothing would ever be the same again. Greg's hand hovered over the prototype device, his mind racing with the potential consequences of his decision. The agonized cries of Ektor and her companions filled the room, their pain a stark reminder of the device's devastating effects. In that moment, Greg made his choice. "We need to shut it down," he announced, his voice firm despite the chaos around him. "Drack, help me disable this thing." Lieutenant Drack nodded, relief evident in his eyes. Together they worked to power down the prototype, their fingers moving swiftly over unfamiliar controls. As the device's glow faded, the Pakled girls' convulsions subsided, their breathing returning to normal. Greg rushed to Ektor's side, cradling her head gently. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. Ektor's eyes fluttered open, a weak smile crossing her face. "Better now," she whispered. With the immediate crisis averted, Greg turned to Drack. "We need to contact General Kraz. This has to end before more lives are lost." Drack hesitated for a moment, then squared his shoulders. "I'll make the call," he said, moving to the communication console. As Drack worked to establish contact, Greg helped Ektor to her feet. The room fell silent, tension thick in the air as they waited for a response from the Pakled leadership. Suddenly, the main screen flickered to life, revealing the stern visage of General Kraz. His eyes narrowed as he took in the scene before him. "Lieutenant Drack," Kraz growled, "explain this situation immediately." Drack stepped forward, his voice steady as he addressed his superior. "General, I respectfully request an immediate ceasefire. The human technology we encountered has proven more dangerous than anticipated. Continued conflict will only result in further losses on both sides." Kraz's expression darkened, but before he could respond, Greg stepped into view. "General Kraz," he said, his tone respectful but firm. "I'm Greg Mitchell, United States Air Force. We have a chance here to end this conflict peacefully. I propose we begin negotiations immediately." The general's eyes flickered between Greg and Drack, his internal struggle evident. Finally he spoke, his voice gruff. "Very well, I will order a temporary cessation of hostilities. But be warned, human, if this is a trick." "It's not, sir," Greg assured him. "We have as much to lose in this fight as you do." As the call ended, a collective sigh of relief filled the room. Outside, the sounds of battle began to fade as word of the ceasefire spread. In the sudden quiet, Hector approached Greg, her large eyes fixed on his face. "Greg," she said softly, "need to talk. About us." Greg felt his heart rate quicken. "Hector, there's something you should know. Dr. Collins said the neural implants might be influencing your behavior, your feelings." Hector shook her head, a determined look in her eyes. "No, implant affecting, yes, but feelings, real. I know now. Clear mind, clear heart. I care for you, Greg, deeply." Before Greg could respond, Hector closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a passionate kiss. The room fell away as Greg returned the embrace, his doubts melting in the warmth of their connection. As they parted, both slightly breathless, they became aware of the stunned silence around them. Human and pack-led alike stared in amazement at this unexpected display of interspecies affection. Dr. Collins was the first to break the silence, her eyes alight with sudden inspiration. "Of course," she breathed. "That's it." All eyes turned to her as she continued, excitement building in her voice. "We can modify the prototype device to gradually alter the neural implants. It could allow Hector and the others to keep their new emotions while preserving their pack-led identities. It's the perfect bridge between our species." Greg looked at Hector, seeing hope bloom in her eyes. "What do you think?" he asked softly. Hector nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "Yes, want to be me, but also want to feel, to love." As the group began to discuss the logistics of Collins's plan, a new energy filled the room. The once opposing forces found themselves working together, united by the possibility of peace and understanding. Over the next few weeks, as negotiations between human and pack-led leaders progressed, Greg and Hector became the face of this new era of cooperation. They shared their story with both species, demonstrating the potential for harmony and mutual growth. Zyla and Mira, inspired by their experiences on Earth, threw themselves into the peace process. They spoke passionately about the value of cultural exchange, their words carrying weight with both human and pack-led delegations. As the final details of the peace agreement were hammered out, Greg found himself standing with Hector on the outpost's observation deck. The desert stretched out before them, the first stars of evening twinkling in the darkening sky. "What happens now?" Hector asked, her hand warm in Greg's. Greg squeezed her hand gently, his gaze fixed on the horizon where earth and sky met. "Now," he said, a smile playing at his lips, "we build something new, together." As they stood there, silhouetted against the twilight, the future stretched out before them, a future filled with challenges, yes, but also with hope, love, and the promise of a new understanding between their peoples.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.